I hope you don't mind, but we got tired of just having practices, so we brought another team out with us so we could have some real games.
I don't mind. Where'd they come from?
Where did we come from? You wouldn't believe how many guys wanted to play here. We had to beat them off with a stick.
Hey, that's Smokey Joe Wood. And Mel Ott. And Gil Hodges.
Willie, I think you can easily compare Gil with yourself. You're both good glove men and good hitters. Is Gil good around that first base bag?
Well, I can say this, Mark. Gil been good around first base for a long time. He was there when I arrived here.
One of the all-time great Dodgers, Gil Hodges, going up to the plate against one of the all-time great Giants, Willie Mays. Baseball's Hall of Fame has got a spot reserved for both you and Gil.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Thank you so much.
Not at all.
Sophie Berger. This is my grandson, Nathaniel, and his friend, Nicholas.
Hello, Mr. Hodges.
Gil. Hi.
Gil? Nick Scamparelli, Gil. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Nick. Thanks for asking.
I'm sorry we're late. It's my fault. The boys wanted to take a cab, but at those prices, come on. So by the time we changed buses from bus number 6 to bus number 4, I became an old woman. Not really, but you know what I'm talking.
So we're gonna beat the Yankees again this year, Gil?
Well, we're gonna try, Nathaniel. They're a pretty tough bunch.
I'll be rooting for you.
Well, thanks. That's gonna help a lot. How about you, Nick? Any questions?
What's a guy like you make a year?
Yeah, I know. You're with these people.
Grandpa! Grandpa!
It's okay.
That's my grandpa, Jules Berger. You played against him in Russia.
I did?
He played for the Russian Bears, maybe you forgot.
Hello, Mr. Hodges. Jules Berger.
Yeah, I understand we played against each other in Russia.
Oh, no, you won't remember.
I remember.
You do?
Of course. Well, you play for the Bears, right?
Right.
It's good to see you again.
Wonderful to see you. You speak Yiddish?
No.
Well, you should know what a mensch is, because that's you.
Gilly and I roomed together, and he was quite a man. I mean, he had a dry sense of humor, from Indiana, and the salt of the earth, as they say. What a great guy. A great gentleman, fine, upstanding man, good Catholic. You know, you can't knock Gil Hodges.
My hope is, and my dream, and I think I feel positive, that at the right time, that the Veterans Committee will look at Gil Hodges, as they already have a number of times, among all the others who they have to consider. And I believe Gil will make it. Most of his teammates are in. It may be hard for American League members of the Veterans Committee to say, what, another Dodger? And it may be difficult for them. But I believe that looking at his overall contribution, he'll round out the infield that justifies being in there.
I wish they'd get on the ball and get him in, because love to have him have that shrine and his plaque up in Cooperstown along with the rest of us. Hey, golly, I haven't heard anything negative about Gil Hodges. When I played with him for quite a few years in Brooklyn and in Los Angeles, I never heard anything negative about Gil Hodges. I don't believe there was anything negative about him.
The Hall of Fame should be from character, ability to play the game of baseball, and what you did for the game of baseball. And Gil, no question about it, one of the greatest glove men ever played first. He was a good hitter. He had a lot of home runs. And as far as character is concerned, there's no question. You know, he just absolutely 100% for what I'm concerned. Yes, I'd very much like to see Gil in the Hall of Fame.
He could beat you with a home run, he could beat you with a base hit, but you know, he could field, he could throw, he could run, and I mean, he could beat you other ways than just with a home run.
Good hitter, yes. Power, yes. He hit to all fields. Gil was an outstanding player. Saved many, many games with his defense, even when he wasn't hitting. So it's hard to imagine that Campanella, who was catching on that infield, Reese, at shortstop, Robinson at second, all in the Hall of Fame, it just seems incomplete that Gil Hodges would not be a member of that outstanding infield. And I think in time that will happen, and it will be certainly justified.
He was more than like a dad. He was like your dad, your school teacher, your coach, your everything. Everything that was out there that you felt accountable to, Gil was all that wrapped up into one. And it was a pleasure to have that feeling towards him. It wasn't a fear thing. It was almost like, this man, I have to be the best I can be for this man. And what a pleasure it is to go out and try to discover what that is.
Incidentally, my opinion of Gil Hodges as a manager is of the highest degree. He was an outstanding manager, and he epitomized what life is all about. He was stern, he was honest, he was hardworking, and he was the type of person that you'd always want to have as a friend.
Gil Hodges, a man of great character, dignity, and courage, and a truly great ball player. Across 18 Major League seasons, Gil Hodges blasted 370 homers, and at the conclusion of the 1962 season, was the leading right-handed home run hitter in National League history. He hit a solid .273 and blasted over 20 homers in 11 seasons, topping the 30 mark 6 times and the 40 mark twice. He walloped 14 grand slams and is one of only 12 players in big league history to launch 4 home runs in a single game.
Gil, you're one of the few players in Major League Baseball history who have hit 4 home runs in one game. Was that a thrill?
Well, it certainly was, Mark. I was pretty lucky. It was in 1950, I believe, and it was a night game against the old Boston Braves, which are now naturally the Milwaukee Braves. I was lucky enough, it was an odd thing. I hit 2 home runs off of left-handed pitchers and 2 home runs off the right-handed pitchers.
Gil Hodges was also a clutch hitter, knocking in over 100 runs in 7 consecutive seasons from 1949 to 1955. In fact, he averaged better than 30 home runs and 100 RBIs for 11 consecutive seasons between 1949 and 1959. He was also durable, playing in over 100 games a season for 14 straight years. He was, without question, one of the greatest fielding first basemen the game has ever known, winning the first 3 Gold Gloves ever awarded to a first baseman. What's more, Gil Hodges was selected to the National League All-Star team 8 times. As a big league manager, Hodges led the New York Mets to what was perhaps the most exciting and remarkable World Series championship our national game has ever known. It was a world championship that lifted the spirits of an entire nation, and it came at a time when America sorely needed its spirits lifted. He was also one of the most beloved men the game has ever known. Baseball fans loved Hodges for much more than just his formidable abilities on a ball field. They knew that although he was a large and very powerful man, it was inner strength that motivated the big first baseman. He was a man of high ideals, a man of great character. In moments of success and triumph, he was modest and reserved. In times of trouble and failure, he was a calming and reassuring force. He held a special place in the hearts of players and fans alike. In many ways, he typified the American hero of a bygone era. A man of action and few words. In the excitement, chaos, and emotional roller coaster that was Ebbets Field in the 1950s, Gil was a sea of calm, at least on the surface. Strong, reserved, soft-spoken, and always a true gentleman, Gil was also a stoic man. Whatever pain, frustration, anger, or pressure he felt, he bore silently and battled against it within himself. He rarely vented stress through an emotional outburst. It wasn't Gil's way. Gil believed a man should be modest about his triumphs, knowing that failure is far more common in life than success. This was the credo Gil Hodges lived by every day of his life. It wasn't always easy, but he never faltered in his beliefs. In the pressure cooker that is big league baseball, especially big league baseball in New York City, it's extremely difficult to live by these standards. But Gil always stood by what he believed in. The stress and pressure of 18 years as a big league player and 9 seasons as a manager stayed locked within him, always. It's ironic that many of the qualities for which Hodges was admired and loved were also personality traits that contributed to his tragic and premature death at age 47 in 1972. Gilbert Raymond Hodges was born on April 4, 1924, in Princeton, Indiana. When he was 7, his family moved to Petersburg, about 30 miles to the north. Located in the southwest part of the state, Petersburg is coal country. To support the Hodges family, Gil's father, Charlie, spent his entire adult life working in the dark, damp, suffocating coal mines. But Charlie Hodges wanted better things for his sons, Gil and Bob. Both boys were excellent athletes, and Charlie Hodges worked with them every day after coming home from the mines. In high school, Gil starred in baseball, football, basketball, and track. After graduating from Petersburg High, Gil attended St. Joseph's College in Oakland City, Indiana. His goal was to become a gym teacher and coach. At St. Joe's, Gil lettered in baseball, basketball, football, and track. In the summer, he played ball in the industrial leagues around Indianapolis, and it was there that Dodger scout Stanley Feasel spotted Hodges. He brought Gil to Brooklyn to work out under the watchful eye of Dodger president Branch Rickey. Rickey signed Gil to a contract for $500 and sent him to the Dodger Class D team to learn the fine art of catching.
I say in my book, The Duke of Flatbush, I mention Branch Rickey a lot because Branch Rickey taught me. I mean, he was such an exceptional man. He was way ahead of his time. I mean, he developed the Cardinals, developed the Dodgers, and went to Pittsburgh and helped develop that organization. But he could look at a young player, 17 years old, and see them 5 years from then. He could just picture how big they were going to be. Say, you're going to be 6'2", you're going to weigh 195 pounds. I mean, he could just picture you, just how you're going to be 5 years later. And then watch you play and know just exactly what you needed to make you a better ball player.
In August of 1943, Gil made his major league debut at Ebbets Field against the Cincinnati Reds. A short time later, World War II beckoned, and Gil, a member of the Marine ROTC program, was called into active service. Gil spent the next 2 years in the Marines as a gunner for the 16th Anti-Aircraft Battalion. For 18 months, he was stationed in the South Pacific and saw battle action on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. But this was a period of his life Gil never spoke about, and the deeds he performed on those battlefields remain untold. The one thing that is known about Gil's time in combat is that he won a Bronze Star for bravery on the bloody battlefields of Okinawa. Gil was discharged in 1945 and went back to the minor leagues as a catcher. 2 years later, in 1947, he was called up to the Dodgers. It was the start of an illustrious career. In 1948, the Dodgers traded catcher Bruce Edwards, called up a young Roy Campanella from the minors, and moved Gil Hodges to first base. Although Gil had never played the position, he went on to become one of the greatest defensive first basemen in the history of the game.
You know, Gil, I'm going to go back a few years. Although you made your mark in the major leagues as a first baseman, I remember when I was broadcasting in the old Piedmont League, you were a catcher for Newport News. What made you change positions?
Well, I was continued catching until 1948, and then Leo Durocher, managing the club at that time, decided I should play first base. Also, a fellow by the name of Roy Campanella was coming up.
That helped make up your mind and theirs.
Yes, that's right, Mark.
It was also in 1948 that Gil met young Joan Lombardi of Brooklyn, and the two were married within a year. The Dodger team Hodges joined in 1948 was to become one of the greatest teams in baseball history, with great players such as Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, Roy Campanella, Carl Furillo, and Duke Snider. The Dodgers would win 7 pennants and 2 world championships between 1949 and 1959. Gil was an integral part of these great teams.
I'm proud to have had the opportunity of playing with the teammates that I had. You couldn't have handpicked them. A Duke Snider, a Carl Furillo, a Gil Hodges, a Jackie Robinson, a Pee Wee Reese, a Billy Cox, even Pafko in left field, or Hermansky, or whoever played left field for the Dodgers. I was just speaking of the regular players. And a pitching staff like we had with Newcomb, Branca, Erskine, Barney, and Labine, Craig, all of these fellas that had come out the Dodger organization. We grew up together, then thank God we got along, and to be the first integrated team, we were winners.
Gil Hodges was a very silent ball player, and you know, we had a team in Brooklyn with a lot of stars. And Gil was one of the biggest, but he was the quietest of them all. He would remind you of that movie, The Quiet Man. He rarely ever popped off or anything. But Gil, when Gil had to assert Gil's ability and his strength, I saw him once in an exhibition game in Fort Worth, Texas, when Pee Wee or somebody slid into second base, and the guy came up fighting, and Gil went right up and lifted the guy up. That ended the fight like that. The Fort Worth player was fighting with Pee Wee. Pee Wee had great respect for Gil. They all knew that Gil was the best first baseman in the league. They all knew that Gil, with Ebbets Field and with his power, was going to drive in 100 runs every year, because they were on base to be driven in. It was Gil's job to get them in.
Although many people remember Hodges for his prolonged slump in the 1952 World Series, what is not so well known is that Gil hit over 300 in 3 World Series. And in 1955, he drove in both runs in the Dodgers' 7th game win over the Yankees, the Dodgers' first and only World Championship in Brooklyn. Indeed, up until 1954, the Dodgers had never won a World Series, and no one was quite sure they ever would. They had played their arch-rivals, the New York Yankees, in 5 series between 1941 and 1953, and lost every time. In 1955, the Brooklyn Dodgers were an aging team. All their stars, Robinson, Reese, Campanella, Snyder, Hodges, were well into their 30s. If the Dodgers didn't win it all in 1955, there was a good chance they would never win. And this great club would go down in history as perhaps the best team never to win a world championship. The 1955 Dodgers got off to an early lead and never looked back, clinching the National League pennant in late September. Once again, they faced the Yankees in the World Series. But this time, it was different. Finally, after over 7 decades of trying, the Dodgers won a World Series. They defeated the Yankees in 7 games and won their first and only World Championship in Brooklyn. Gil Hodges got the game-winning hit in the 7th contest. The celebration went on for days in the city of Brooklyn. The Dodgers won the pennant the next year, too. But things returned to normal as the Yankees won the World Series, with Don Larson pitching his historic perfect game in the 5th contest. In the winter of 1957, owner Walter O'Malley moved the Dodgers to Los Angeles, and an historic era in baseball came to an end. But while the Dodgers were in Brooklyn, they left their mark not only on baseball history, but on American history, society, and folklore as well. No baseball team was ever more popular or more loved by all of America than were the Bums from Brooklyn. Their legacy as the battling underdogs, as every man's team, who after so many heartbreaking setbacks and after so many years of trying, finally won it all in 1955, is as much a part of American folklore as it is of baseball history. And it was in Brooklyn with the Dodgers that an African-American played in the major leagues for the first time. It changed forever the course of baseball history, but more importantly, the course of American history. And if Branch Rickey knew he had the right man in Jackie Robinson, he also knew he had the right city in Brooklyn. Perhaps in no other city in the United States at that time could this monumental step have taken place. Not in America in 1947. Indeed, the Brooklyn Dodgers set an example for the entire nation. They did so not by speaking out about the innate rights of man or expounding on the ignorance of racism and bigotry. Instead, in a very effective and powerful manner, they illustrated to every American the virtues of tolerance, determination, teamwork, brotherhood, and courage. Whatever differences existed among the members of the team, they stood as one against the poisons of prejudice and hate. Jackie Robinson's triumph was a victory for right-thinking men everywhere. And Gil Hodges, as a leader on that team, played an important role in Jackie Robinson's success. Quite often, early in Robinson's career, Jackie was the target of vicious verbal abuse from opposing fans and players. Many times, Gil Hodges would have a quiet word with the people who were hurling insults at Robinson. And whether it was because of Gil's imposing physical presence or out of respect for Gil, the verbal abuse stopped. In 1995, Rachel Robinson, Jackie's wife, recalled Gil's role in Robinson's triumph when she wrote, "In his own quiet way, Gil was a mainstay of the team, a slugger, an outstanding fielder, and a man of strong character. Jackie always counted on him."
He respected Gil a great deal, both as a player and as a person. He was one of the few players that Jack and I spent time with off the field and enjoyed, both Gil and Joan.
We were very, very close. I was one of the first persons that Rachel had befriended, and I was very close with Rachel. I used to hold Jackie Jr. on my lap. You know, I was born in Brooklyn, and there was only one Jackie Robinson, really. He was absolutely the greatest.
Joan is a very effusive, warm person who is very open and willing to make contact. And I think with her assistance that Gil and she saw to it that we got together. And we enjoyed them beyond just those gestures. We enjoyed them enough to see them over and over again. And so again, Jack was just, and I too, were just devastated by the loss of Gil, because it was so sudden and something we couldn't have anticipated, and it was like a really good guy, you know, had gone.
During the Brooklyn Dodger glory years, Gil Hodges fashioned a career that is worthy of induction into baseball's Hall of Fame. As a player, a manager, and a man, he belongs. It states in the requirements for selection to the Hall of Fame that members shall be chosen based upon the basis of playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and their contributions to the team or teams on which they played, and to baseball in general. Indeed, when you describe a man who had tremendous abilities, a man of character and integrity, who made enormous contributions to his team and to baseball, you're describing Gil Hodges. As a Hall of Famer, Gil Hodges qualifies in many ways. His 370 career home runs attest to his consistent power throughout his career. His 11 consecutive seasons of 20 or more home runs, during which time he hit over 30 round-trippers 6 times and over 40 twice, place him among the premier power hitters of his era. Indeed, in all of Major League Baseball in the decade of the 1950s, Gil finished second in home runs to Duke Snider and third in extra base hits to Snider and Stan Musial. Also for that decade, he was in the top 10 in games, runs, hits, walks, and total bases. But perhaps the most telling statistic is this: the top 10 home run hitters of the power-laden era from 1940 to 1960 were Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Eddie Matthews, Stan Musial, Duke Snider, Gil Hodges, Ralph Kiner, Joe DiMaggio, Johnny Mize, and Yogi Berra. Of these 10 players, only one is not in the Hall of Fame: Gil Hodges. Gil Hodges was an 8-time National League All-Star, and he revolutionized defensive play at first base. As a team player, Gil Hodges was an integral and irreplaceable part of the great Dodger National League dynasty of the late 40s and 50s. That Dodger team won 7 pennants and 2 world championships between 1947 and 1959. Interestingly, of the mainstays on that great team, Robinson, Reese, Snider, Campanella, and Hodges, Gil is the only one who isn't in the Hall of Fame. Gil Hodges' contributions to the game of baseball go beyond his accomplishments as a player. As the manager of the '69 Mets, he led his young team to one of the most incredible world championships in baseball history. It's impossible to describe in words what this did for the game of baseball, and indeed for the nation itself. America was torn apart by the social unrest and violence of the 1960s. And yet, the ascent of the 1969 Mets brought the nation together in rooting for the 100-to-1 underdogs. At the same time, the game of baseball itself had, by the end of 1968, hit an absolute low point in popularity. With all the social unrest in the nation, and the fact that the 1968 season was a year when offensive production in the game was at an all-time low, it seemed America had lost much of its interest in its national pastime. Then, in baseball's centennial year of 1969, the Miracle Mets brought the nation together as one as they drove to the World Championship. As every player and coach on that team acknowledges, the Mets would not have won without Gil Hodges as their manager. Another thing Hodges is not credited for is how, in many ways, he revolutionized the art of pitching. Along with pitching coach Rube Walker, Hodges made a very comprehensive and detailed study of pitching mechanics. He imparted this wisdom to hurlers such as Tom Seaver, Nolan Ryan, Jerry Koosman, and Tug McGraw. These pitchers went on to pitch a combined total of over 80 big league seasons, winning over 800 major league games, with two of them, Seaver and Ryan, becoming Hall of Famers. Since that time, Gil's theories and lessons about pitching have become a standard part of pitching instruction on every level of organized baseball. As a man and a role model, Gil Hodges was without question one of the greatest men of character and integrity the game of baseball has ever known. A modest and humble man who won a Bronze Star for bravery on the battlefields of Okinawa, Hodges was a genuine hero to millions of people, and he always represented what was the very best about our national game. Perhaps the best summation of Gil Hodges as a man appeared on the back of his 1967 Topps baseball card, which said, "Gil Hodges epitomizes the courage, sportsmanship, and integrity of our national pastime." Gil's teammate, the late Hall of Famer Pee Wee Reese, echoed these sentiments when he said, "If you had a son, it sure would be a great thing to have him grow up to be just like Gil Hodges." When the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles for the 1958 season, Gil went with them. He was at the tail end of his career, but helped the Los Angeles Dodgers win the 1959 World Series against the Chicago White Sox. In the 1961 National League expansion draft, Gil was acquired by the newly formed New York Mets.
We came in to play the Mets at the Polo Grounds, and I had a bunch of friends and family there. I got into the ball game. I was a relief pitcher with the Cubs. And one of the things I had was pretty good control, pretty much. And I don't recall who was up before Gil, but I knew he was on deck, and I almost became incoherent because here was a guy I idolized as a young man, and I was going to pitch him against him in the Polo Grounds, a stadium that I hated being a Dodger fan. Well, Gil proceeded to come up, and I don't think I got within a foot of home plate. I just threw him 4 balls because I was nervous. I had no idea where to throw the ball. I kept looking at the man, and instead of seeing a batter, I was seeing Gil Hodges years before as a player, and me as a young boy watching him play.
The new Mets are bringing National League Baseball back to New York with an added attraction. Old Professor Casey Stengel himself to talk things up. He admits his pitching is weak, but he has men like Roger Craig, ex-Dodger, and a former Cincinnati player, Jay Hook, to build upon. Felix Mantilla and Charlie Neal are a double-play combination. With another ex-Dodger, Gil Hodges, the Mets are showing some preseason prep that should raise the expectations of New York fans. Anyway, they have Casey.
Unfortunately, The 1962 Mets were perhaps the worst team in the history of baseball, losing 120 games in their first season. Gil hit the first homer in Mets history, but injuries kept him out for most of the season. In 1963, he played only 11 games for the Mets, and then took the job of managing the Washington Senators of the American League. The Senators were one of the worst teams in baseball, but under Gil's strong and steady leadership, they moved up from last place to 6th place in 4 years. Then, in 1968, Hodges was signed to manage the New York Mets. It was a turning point in Mets history. With Gil Hodges as their manager, the Mets became serious. Unfortunately, Gil could not finish the 1968 season on the Mets bench. In August, he suffered a mild heart attack. But the doctors said with enough rest and by giving up smoking, Gil could return to manage the Mets the following year. In 1968, the Mets finished in 9th place. They were improving, and people expected them to become contenders over the following few years. But no one in their wildest dreams could have possibly imagined what the Mets would do the following year. In one of the most memorable seasons in baseball history, the 1969 Mets brought all of America to its feet cheering with their drive to the World Championship. Their timing couldn't have been better. As one of the most violent and turbulent decades in modern American history came to an end, an era that shook the nation to its very foundations and left deep scars across the face of the country, the Mets brought people together as nothing else could. As underdogs, the Mets appealed to a basic instinct in all Americans. America loves an underdog, and the Mets were the most underdogs in the history of our national game. As 100-to-1 shots to go all the way, their heroics on the ball field even overshadowed man's first walk on the moon. Neil Armstrong's lunar stroll might have been a giant leap for mankind, but the Mets' victory was a triumph for the common man. By beating the Braves in the National League playoffs and the heavily favored Orioles in the World Series, the Mets truly became America's team. And behind it all stood Gil Hodges. He had molded the team, he had gotten the best from each man, and he led them to what is perhaps the most memorable and remarkable World Championship in baseball history. Every player on that 1969 Mets team gives Gil Hodges credit for making them what they were. Hodges was a truly great manager. He taught his young players not only about baseball, but about life and what was important in life. To this day, many of the '69 Mets credit Gil Hodges not only with making them better ball players, but with making them better human beings. He taught them respect and honor and humility. Unselfish, determined, confident, courageous, skilled, and professional are all words that describe the 1969 world champion New York Mets. And they're also words that describe Gil Hodges. Indeed, the 1969 world champion New York Mets were an extension of Gil Hodges as a man and as an athlete.
Gil was always a guy that had a strong hand and a strong voice and meant what he said. Was a great leader, and everyone respected him a great deal.
Gil was amazing, I guess. It never ceased to amaze me that there was nothing that he didn't know was going on.
He didn't miss many tricks. He was on top of it. If you watched Hodges play cribbage in the clubhouse, he was like a machine. He was like a computer. He was like IBM mainframe, you know what I mean? I mean, he'd get his cards and he'd discard it faster, add it up total. I mean, his brain worked so well and so quickly and so accurately, man. It was, you know, I mean, it was amazing to watch. You respected it, and you felt like, you know, this guy's on top of his game.
Gil was always a very positive guy, and at the same time he was teaching. He was getting into people's heads, and I think probably the summation at the end of people's careers with the handling of Gil Hodges was that he made us better players. We were talented players, but it's much more than that. We were smarter players, more professional players.
And Gil was the kind of guy that just demanded respect immediately, and you followed that. He had a profound effect on the ball club. From the standpoint of the effort that was on the field was an absolute professional effort every time he went out there. For me personally, he is the one individual that taught me more about being a professional, about being a professional on the field and how I go about my trade than anybody else that I was ever associated with.
From day one, spring training, I think Gil Hodges had a plan. I don't think Tom Seaver, Jerry Kuzman, or Tommy Agee, or Clint Denham, or Cleon Jones had a plan. We had no plan. Our plan was to come to the ballpark every day, play, and try to be better. In most cases, the player makes the manager. In this case, the manager made the players. He made each and every one of us better.
The reason for the New York Mets' success in 1969 certainly has been a great team effort, I think. I believe this is the best team effort of any ball club I've ever seen. Everyone on the ball club contributed a great deal to the success of the Mets.
That street is presently 3400 block, Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn, and today it becomes Gil Hodges Place.
Thank you, Mayor Lindsay, and I would just like to express my thanks to Mayor Lindsay and all his staff and all of you wonderful people here in New York City. And certainly on behalf of the Mets, the players, I'm just happy and proud to be their manager, and all of us are just thrilled at the day. And I might add in closing just that all of us stay over here. Don't go to Gil Hodges Place. Thank you.
Bronze medallion of the City of New York, given this day to Gil Hodges, manager of the world champion New York Mets.
Over the following few years, the Mets, under Hodges, finished in third place. They were contenders each year, one of the better teams in baseball. Despite the pressures Gil faced, he was, as always, strong and silent. In the spring of 1972, the Mets reported to spring training to begin another run at the pennant with Gil Hodges at the helm. Baseball operations, however, came to a grinding halt when the players went out on strike. On Easter Sunday, 1972, Gil Hodges went out to play 2 rounds of golf with his coaches. After they finished, as they were walking off the course, Coach Joe Pignatano asked Gil what time they should meet for dinner. Gil replied, about 7 o'clock. A split second later, Gil Hodges collapsed to the ground. Coach Joe Pignatano tried to revive him, but to no avail. It was a massive coronary.
I actually feel that when he died, a part of my spirit, I just didn't have that desire to play like I had with him, you know. I mean, I remember times when God throw at me, like Bill Hands when he threw at me, you know. I mean, I wanted to almost like get in front of the ball and get hit with the ball, you know. There was no fear at all as far as playing the game when he was playing. And then it seems like when he died, I still played hard, I always played hard. But it seems like that extra desire that I had with him wasn't there anymore.
We lost our leader. Our heart was cut out of us. When your fearless leader is taken away from you and you're going to battle, your legs have a little bit of jelly. We still didn't have that same drive, and we were competitive, but you know, it's like losing your engine, because Gil was the quiet leader that really took us to the next level, and the Mets were never the same.
When Gil Hodges died in 1972, the outpouring of grief throughout the nation was overwhelming. He was truly beloved and respected, not only in New York, but across the country. Thousands lined up to view his body as he lay in state in Brooklyn. He was only 47 years old.
The shock of being on the Yankees, and I flew back on the plane with his body from Fort Lauderdale. Actually, we flew out of West Palm Beach, I mean. But I was with the Yankees when I heard that. And it was, you know, it felt like if you were in, like, California and one of those big redwood trees fell down, when you heard that Gil Hodges keeled over and died of a heart attack, you had the same sense that one of those big giant sequoias fell over, because that's how solid you thought he was as a guy. I mean, he had a great, incredible physical presence to go along with all the other aspects of Gil Hodges. Now, I know he'd had some heart problems, but you just think, no problem, he survived that, and that it wasn't, you know, something like that wasn't going to happen to Gil. It was an incredible shock, and we flew back on the plane with the body, and when they took his body off the plane, I went outside the plane just looking at it like, you know, you're 20, you know, what am I, 27, 28? I'm looking at it, and it's like, this is unbelievable, you know, and this is the way he was loved in New York. This was going to be a sad day, and it was all of that.
On our '69 Mets team, everybody didn't like Gil, but they respected him. And so the guys that didn't like him were the guys that wanted to be playing more, wanted to be more of a part of it. And because he was the manager, he's the guy that was in their way, but nobody ever thought he was in their way when we wore that ring.
When you thought that we should get somebody up in the bullpen, when it finally occurred to you as a player on the field, into the game, you would just glance over your shoulder. There was already somebody up. So you couldn't, as a player, you couldn't outguess him. You couldn't be quicker than him. He had a wonderful sense of timing and perception. He utilized his players very well. I think he made all of us overachievers. The pity is that he did die, because the talk for so many years is that Gil should have been in the Hall of Fame as a player, and I felt that if he would have managed just a little bit longer and lived a little bit longer, he would have gotten into the Hall of Fame as a manager.
Gil, to me, was the best manager I ever seen in the big leagues or anywhere, because he was always a step ahead. He knew exactly what he was going to do the next inning. If this happened, if something else happened, he knew exactly what was going to happen after that.
I thought Gil had a good flight. He didn't play favors for anybody. Gil was very good with the players. He didn't care if you were a star or not. If he thought you'd be out there on that field at a certain time, you better be there. And he was good about it. And he had his thing about it. You know, when I coached for him, you know, he gave the signs, and you know, guys will miss him. He would tell me, and I would tell him, "You want me to give him a sign?" He said, "Don't you dare." He says, "You give a sign, I'll fine you." He says, because Gil was fine. He gave the sign right first day in spring training. He gave the signs to the guys, and he says, if they don't know him by now, it's going to cost them. That's all. But he was good, and he was good with pitchers, and also he had Rube Walker over, did a good job for him.
In the end, the true measure of a man is not what he accomplished for himself in his lifetime, but how he touched the lives of other people. In this respect, Gil Hodges was a truly great man. He touched the thousands of fans who loved and admired him, and who thrilled to his achievements as a player and manager. He touched the people of Brooklyn, who from the day he arrived there adopted him as their own. And Gil returned this love by making Brooklyn his home. He touched the thousands of kids who looked up to him as a hero, and he never wavered in the good example he set for them. He touched the lives of the men who played with him and who played under him when he managed. And even those who didn't know Gil Hodges personally were touched by the man's great dignity, decency, honesty, his devotion to God, family, and country. Perhaps sometime soon, Gil Hodges will be enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, an honor he richly deserves. He already holds that place in the hearts of many millions of baseball fans. In Gil Hodges' hometown of Petersburg, Indiana, there's a bridge named after him. On the Petersburg side of the bridge is a stone monument built in Gil's memory. On it are listed Gil's many accomplishments as a player, manager, and as an American. When the bridge committee in Petersburg erected the monument, they left the bottom of the stone blank. In this blank space, they intended to carve the words from Gil Hodges' Hall of Fame plaque. Over 3 decades have passed, and yet the space at the bottom of the stone remains blank.